point about we need this benevolent dictator and can we trust the people? What about Brexit? And the people are doing nothing about climate change. The optimistic news is that most people around the world do want to do something about climate change. It's elected politicians in America that are not in favor of it. Every nation in the world except for the US and Syria, and at one point Nicaragua signed the Paris Accord. And then Nicaragua did sign it. So now it's just the US and Syria. I would make the case that there's a pretty clear line to be drawn between the financial incentives of the current carbon industry, which are quite large. Until recently, these are all the largest companies by market cap, and just regulatory capture in the American government system. So I think the idea that people don't want to do something about climate change, my read on most of the data suggests the opposite. It's that our current forms of government aren't doing enough about it. So right now, if you want to weigh in on an issue, you're told call your representative or email your representative, usually more call. You know why they say to call? The reason is because it will tie up their phone line, so it will be more annoying to them, so they'll want to vote your way to get you to go away. But these tools are not really all that trustworthy. What the most famous online organizing has to do around net neutrality. There's like SOPA and PIPA and all these bills, and all these websites had banners about it, and then they went black for the day to protest. And so hundreds of thousands of people weighed in. Well, then as soon as Trump got into office, he had a new FCC. Ajit Pai was his new chairperson, and they were going to remove all the restrictions that the Obama admin had put in. And so they had this page that was open for comments, open for public comments. And it just now has come out that a third-party lobbyist organization created millions of fake comments, stole names, committed fraud on a massive scale, wrote in fake names and fake computer-generated comments to impersonate people. And representatives don't know whether these are really their constituents or not. So the foundation of a trustworthy democracy, I mean, any democracy depends upon one person, one vote, not whoever can hire the most programmers to write scripts, unlimited votes.
I came from BBC background, KQED 25 years ago, was one of the really early employees at Wired. This place is absolutely like hashtag democracy's immune system.
This is Democracy Manifest.
We're excited to be hosting this event with Liquid Democracy. I went to my first Liquid Democracy event maybe a year and a half ago, and I think it's an incredible movement, an interesting concept, and really excited to see where this goes and what we do tonight. So without further ado, I'm going to just say one last thank you and a sense of appreciation to all of you for being a part of this experiment that we've built here on the corner of 16th and Valencia. I'm honored that you're here, so thank you very much. And with that, I'm going to invite Josh, David, and Agatha to the stage.
I'm Josh. Hello. Welcome. Thank you guys for joining. Tonight we are discussing what is the future of democracy. So if you were hoping to go to a different talk, you're not in the right place. Cool. All right. We're going to introduce ourselves in a second. But first, we really want this to be a community discussion. We're all here in this discussion together. So I just want to read quickly the definition of democracy according to Google's first result. I was being lazy. A system of government by the whole population or all the eligible members of a state, typically through elected representatives. There's another one, and then control of an organization or group by the majority of its members. So a question for all of us here. Let's all participate. Raise your hand if it's important to you to live in a democracy. So that's kind of majority. Yeah, cool. So I'm really interested, and I would love at some point for folks who did not raise your hand, I'm really curious for why. And I appreciate your honesty. Next question. Based on current trends, are you optimistic about the future of democracy? Raise your hand if you're optimistic about the future of democracy. Wow, so that's like a lot. What is that, half? That was like a maybe a third. It's like a C. Okay, cool. We'll come back to those questions in a second. Great. Okay. I want to acknowledge one thing, and then we're going to talk about ourselves as a panel. I just want to talk about diversity and diversity of this panel. And something I'm always very sensitive of when I go to panels is what the diversity is, not just of how people look, but of their background and what they do and what perspective they're coming from. And I think there are ways in which we actually do have diversity, and then there are ways, some of which are very obvious, in which we don't. So I just want to call attention to that. One of the ways in which I think we don't have a lot of diversity, and that is going to guide this conversation, is our sort of work and belief in the importance of digital and technology for democracy, and a sort of hopeful basic assumption. So that being said, I'll quickly introduce myself. My name is Josh Krafchin. I never cared about politics or democracy until about 2 years ago during the 2016 presidential election. And then I worked with a group of friends and we created an organization called Swing Left. And I got into all of the messy stuff of what it is our political system today. And I got kind of scared and I started working on investigating what are other options and opportunities. And so now I work on a platform called Liquid US, and I'm a democracy hacker, and I do lots of other things.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for coming. My name is Agatha Bacelar, and I'm running for US Congress here in San Francisco, California's 12th district, yes. Thank you. That does mean I am challenging Nancy Pelosi, who is someone that I voted for, that I respect, that I am grateful for her service. However, she has been our representative for longer than I have been alive. And I think in that time, San Francisco and the world has radically changed. And yet, as 21st century citizens, we're still interacting with 19th century institutions and 15th century information technology. That status quo might be serving some, but it's certainly not serving everyone. And I think that technology has a major role to play on the future of democracy. I'm not just on this panel as a candidate, but also as someone who has been working at the intersection of democracy and the internet. I'm a founding member of Democracy Earth, which is a Y Combinator-backed nonprofit that builds blockchain-based voting and governance software. I first heard of the Argentinian hacktivist founders while I was working for a social justice organization called Emerson Collective. I was there for the last 4.5 years. And they started a political party in Argentina that ran candidates that were based on a civic participation platform. And so they've inspired me. If I were to be elected, I would be the first member of Congress to make decisions based on how people vote on an open source, secure digital platform. There you go.
Thanks so much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm so excited to see all of you. I'm David Harris, and I've been excited about democracy for a long time. Actually, when I was in high school and at the beginning of college, I got really obsessed with climate change and environmental activism, so much so that I got this scholarship that led me, when I was 19, to get an opportunity to get an internship at the White House at the Council on Environmental Quality. That was actually one of my first jobs. I ended up working there and then staying on and working in the Office of Management and Budget for a few months. This was the very end of the Clinton administration. And I ended up kind of disappointed at the end. It was a particularly bad time because everything I worked on in the administration got immediately reversed by the Bush administration. But beyond that, I was really frustrated with how difficult it was for even Bill Clinton, who obviously, I could tell, cared about climate change. I could tell because there was this long debate about whether or not he could use certain language in a speech about climate change, how strong his position could be. And I worked with the speechwriters, and there were all these internal debates. What could he say? What could he say? We ended up writing this really conservative paragraph about climate change. And then Bill Clinton ad-libbed that paragraph and went totally off script and said something much stronger. Clearly, when someone goes off script, improving in the moment, that's actually what they really think. And he still could not get any binding international treaty on climate change certified or ratified or enacted in any meaningful way, even while he was president, much less something that he could do and then would be reversed. So I decided to kind of stop working on politics for about 10 or 12 years, and then I got excited about it again back in 2012, and I had this idea to run an app, to create an open source app that could actually, as a piece of software, run for political office. And I called it at the time App for Senate. I had this whole plan for the app to run through a human proxy against Dianne Feinstein. And I got pretty close to doing it. I had the human proxy lined up who was committed to doing it. It was kind of like part serious and part performance art piece, but the day before, my human proxy decided he didn't want to run for Senate, and so we didn't go through with it. But that ended up being the beginning of a bunch of research I did about technology, civic tech. First, when I was working at a think tank in Palo Alto called the Institute for the Future, where I worked for 10 years. And then later, as part of my research and work teaching at UC Berkeley, where I've been for the last 4 years, I teach one class called Civic Technology and another class called Social Movements and Social Media. And in both of those classes, we dig really deeply into the potential and also the pitfalls of technology for the future of democracy.
Wonderful. Hi, everybody. I am also named David, adding to our diversity of the panel. I'm David Ernst. I most of the time these days work on this platform called Liquid US. Last year, I also ran as an app for government. Spoiler alert, I did not win. I got 4,000 votes. I needed 10,000 votes. It was an incredible experience. I highly encourage anyone, if you're thinking about it, to go for it. Incredibly rewarding and educational experience. And I got into these same ideas, caring about democracy for as long as I can remember. I also have spent a lot of time and work in and around open source software, and seeing what that process is like, where so many more people in theory are allowed to participate, and how different that is from our public governments, and how shut out so many people are. And so about 3 years ago, friends and I started working on what we could do to help make it easier for citizens to be heard, make it easier for people to connect with their representatives, make it easier to hold our representatives accountable when they do and don't vote, listen to what we want in terms of legislation. And so we've been building this platform called Liquid US. We've been working with lots of advocacy organizations, and at this point, we're up to nearly 6,000 citizens that have used it to reach out to representatives on policy. And I think there's a lot of questions to be asked about what a healthier democracy can look like for the 21st century. We started a podcast and YouTube channel called Liquid Future that I encourage you to reach out. But more than anything else, I want there to be so many more conversations like this evening. Couldn't be happier that this is happening. And it's especially amazing to see everyone in person, because my life is usually having these conversations with people over email. So seeing real human bodies in physical form is very welcome. So couldn't be more grateful that everyone came out, and that Manny and everyone on Manny's team has created this space. And thank you all for being here.
Okay, so let's get into the messy, dirty stuff of the discussion. One just rule of thumb: if you wanna contribute, that'd be great. Questions are great, comments are great. Be respectful. We all know how to do that. And then maybe let's also stick to like the 90-second rule, so we don't just want to like go on and on. Make the point, get in, get out. Okay, so. We'll start with the panelists and then open it up to the floor. Here's the question. What are the most urgent problems facing democracy? And you can scope that either in Oakland, I live in Oakland, San Francisco, California, the United States, the world. It's open-ended. What are the most urgent problems facing democracy?
Should I go first? I think democracy is always a work in progress, but I think it's a problem when the world is changing and democratic institutions aren't keeping up with the times. I think that the way democratic institutions are designed, they are designed to keep people out. We have to vote in person on a weekday, on a work day, every few years, and that prevents certain people from showing up. Only about 60% of people tend to vote. And I can make one note about Congress. Only 5% of members of Congress are millennials, even though we are the largest voting bloc, especially here in San Francisco. Only 10% have any sort of STEM background. So I think in a future that's going to be dominated by AI and automation and social media monopolies, we need more leadership to take us into a future that realizes these urgent issues that are going to be facing us.
Are we going in order down the line?
Sure.
All right.
Whoever's ready.
This is a tough question because there are a lot of challenges facing democracy today. I mean, the one term that I really like and find valuable is originally from Zeynep Tufekci, the author of this book called Twitter and Tear Gas, which I highly recommend to everyone here. I actually use it as a textbook for the first time this year. She uses this term called networked authoritarianism, and this is the idea that in authoritarian or authoritarian-leaning states, they have these leaders, these governments have become networked, and they are using the power of technology to basically propagate authoritarianism and to take power away from people. And that is one of the things that I think challenges this kind of techno-optimist view that I and many others have had for the last 10 years about, that came from Arab Spring. It came from Black Lives Matter and these movements that we saw coming up, and thought like, wow, these movements are using technology to really change political participation for the better. Now, when you have these networked authoritarian regimes that are using those same technologies, but with bigger budgets, better tools, better technology in some cases than these independent activist groups or than well-meaning politicians, I think we have real problems.
Yeah, just to add on other issues that haven't been mentioned yet, I think the thing, if you ask people, especially outside of San Francisco, the thing that the vast majority of citizens might tell you eventually, wide consensus about this, is just money in politics. I mean, the polling is something like 90+% of Americans think that money in politics is a problem. I mean, wide consensus. And that points to what you're saying, David, in a certain sense about just this asymmetry of tools. All the technology that's available for incumbents, people already in office, in terms of hyper-specific gerrymandering tools and psychometric graphics like Cambridge Analytica style and all these things, it's just unmatched by what regular people in the room have. So that's definitely a big part of, I think, what most people see as the problem. On top of that, in general, sometimes this isn't the most popular statement to make, but I think that the fact that there's only two options leaves a lot of possibilities off the table. The fact that we, for the most part, live in a political duopoly, where it's controlled by two mostly hierarchical organizations, just means that there's a huge number of groups and perspectives that don't really have a seat at the table. And so I'd like to see there be more options. And just on top of that, just the idea of who we are represented by, it just doesn't, when you stop and think about the numbers of like one person representing 1 million people, most of who they don't know their name, it doesn't totally make sense. It seems somewhat antiquated. And so in general, it just seems like our world has changed so much, but our governance hasn't kept up with the times. It made sense in this like 1776 agrarian society, but it seems to be bursting at the seams in certain ways. And so I think there are now ways in which we could actually pick our representatives ourselves that could be a lot more trustworthy and be people we actually know, that would make for a much more accountable and authentic system. That's what's been on my mind.
Are we supposed to disagree with each other whenever possible? Okay. It makes for like good, exciting conflict, right? So I just want to challenge you on two things. Other David shares my name, but not all my ideas. So the two options thing, I felt that way for a long time, and actually until probably this year, I felt that way, or the past year. And then I started doing a lot more research on European and Latin American politics, where they have a lot more political parties. And I read this book, How Democracies Die. Highly recommend that one also. And Stephen Levitsky is the author. And in that book, he talks about this important role of party officials and leaders as gatekeepers who keep out the would-be authoritarians who take down democracies. And when you look, we're always hearing here about rise of crazy neo-Nazi party in Scandinavia or in Europe, or rise of crazy new fascist in X country. When you have lots more political parties, that happens a lot more. And it's actually, you hear in Europe, if you talk to enough people, they think oh, wouldn't it be nice if we just had two parties like the US? Things would work better. So I think that the whole two-party thing, yeah, it sucks. And the parties we've got here are not great. And I don't really like either of them that much, but no offense. Are you running as a Democrat?
I am running as a Democrat.
Okay. And I worked in a Democratic White House, so whatever. But I think that it's not something that we should assume as a given. It might be a grass is greener kind of thing. Our system sucks. It's probably better somewhere else. They think their system sucks, and it might be better here. In many cases. The other thing, the money in politics, I agree, it's a huge problem. But I think it's probably worth just reminding everyone in this room that Trump did a lot better than Clinton on small donors, with small donors and a smaller budget. And, just want to throw that out there.
Both still backed by billionaires and was a billionaire, and backed by a billionaire Russian Kremlin organization.
Absolutely. Sure, and he started out as a billionaire, which really helps. But again, I think we shouldn't assume that just getting big money out of politics is going to solve all our problems. Also, lobbying. If you add up all the money spent on lobbying outside of election funding, election campaigns, that's some huge, insane amount of money also that we wouldn't address with campaign finance reform.
Yeah. What did we miss? What did we not include in the most urgent problems facing democracy? Thank you. What did we miss? And I think a gentleman back here, you're probably about. Is there a mic going around?
It's right here. I got it.
Oh, thanks, Manny. I can also.
Whose question is it?
It's right over here, right directly in front of me.
All right.
Actually, I was going to just point out that I think the biggest threat, at least in my view, is our education system, because there's just a complete lack of discourse in our society. We have no level of nuance in our conversation. I mean, if you just listen to what's on TV and the conversation between people, you can see that the fact that our political system is just two-sided has basically bled into our conversations around ideas and politics. So I think just education and the lack of it actually is, in my view, the biggest threat.
Right next to you, and then we'll come here next and here.
So actually, fundamentally, is there enough interest in politics in the general population to begin with? I mean, that general interest is not there. 10 of us, hundreds of us just sitting together talking about things. We have 0.1%, 1% worth of number of votes. It doesn't matter. On a subject of Europeans having sort of neo-Nazis, I think it's a good thing. Having certain ideas come up and sort of face it head on, it might be actually better for the society, as in just growing under the whole surface, and then at some point you're left with 40% of the population believing this and taking over a party.
Great. I think in the front row here, and then you, and then I'm going to go into another question.
I would just say truth versus fake news. I think that's a big deal right now.
I hear you.
Truth.
Truth versus fake news.
Well, when I think about democracy and what's going wrong with it, during the 20th century, the biggest threat was mostly external, right? Like fascism or communism, authoritarian governments taking over. But now it seems like the problem's more internal. It's like you have all these countries that are kind of rotting from within, like maybe Russia, where they kind of look like they're democracies on the outside, but they've just been completely corrupted inside. I'd say that's like probably the biggest problem. And then maybe another problem is just like ineffectiveness. Like our governments just aren't very effective at getting things done right now, and that just undermines people's faith in the system. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for saying ineffectiveness. That's a great that's a good segue into, I guess, the next part of this. And by the way, I'm not trying to shut down the what's wrong with democracy conversation, so feel free to keep criticizing. I'm not trying to like fix democracy right now. That's not it. But I do want to now turn the discussion on its head a little bit and think about together, is it possible that technology can be a positive force in creating a healthier, more beautiful, more vibrant democracy? And you're saying, so.
Yeah, I absolutely have that conviction. One of the ways that I see the history of the United States, and this is in part informed by a book recommendation I'll also give called The Architecture of a Techno-Democracy, is that during independence, the US transitioned from the rule of one person, King George III, to the rule of a 1% system of Congress and money. And now, 230 years later, with all this technology that we have now, we can finally transition to a democracy that represents closer to 100% of people. Back in the day, you literally needed someone to ride on horseback to go to DC and represent you. But now we should be communicating in real time. So we have still as a country not realized our greatest promises of racial justice, of full access to the ballot box. And with technology, we can actually immediately, universally enfranchise people and collect majority interest in real time instead of just checking in once every 2 to 4 years. I hear from politicians all the time, oh, I can't vote on that thing because constituents in my district, they don't want that. And then, but there's no evidence for that. There's just polling, which is expensive and often inaccurate. And so you just take people's word for it. Like, okay, every district is so different, okay. But if we actually had evidence, if we collected majority interest, we could hold candidates accountable to the will of the people.
Yeah, mix things up. I am also overall of the opinion that technology, I think and hope, can be a huge force for good for self-governance in the long run, as long as people are having sober conversations about what all the potential downfalls can be. Definitely don't want to go into anything with blind faith or Pollyannish attitude. In particular, the vision that was introduced to me about 3 years ago that's really captured my imagination is this idea that we can have representatives that we picked ourselves that weren't just the single person that got 51% in an election. That right now our system is based on this feudal idea of one representative for 1 million people in the geographic region, and in the future we can actually pick our representatives ourselves. So just as a thought experiment, you don't have to raise your hand, no embarrassment, but just think to yourself, do you know the name of your local representative, your state representative, and your national representative? I hope it's a high number. I just want to...
Well, let's ask. Why don't you... Let's like, who raise your hand if you know the names of any of those people. Okay, raise your hands if you know the names of all of those people.
Yeah, this room is a lot better than most places, believe it or not. When I was running for office last year, I was running for the State House in California, and I was talking to people on the street all the time, and I would ask people what they thought of the incumbent who's been in office for 6 years. And I kid you not, 100 people I asked, 0 of them knew the incumbent's name, who's been representing them for 6 years and controls a $200 billion taxpayer budget that we're all funding. And so agree 100% about the earlier comment of how many people actually care about this stuff. How many people can actually be that engaged about all this stuff. And the vision for the future that really captured my imagination of what healthier representation looks like is that we have representatives that we actually know and trust ourselves, whether it's coworkers or colleagues or journalists that we like or professors that we've worked with or just other politicians that we actually have more familiarity with. We can get to pick our own representatives, and we can be in control of our representation at any time so that we can change that in the future. So this entire system that I'm describing is known as this name delegative democracy, also known as liquid democracy sometimes. It's suggested as a 21st century upgrade upon electoral representation. So I think that it's an interesting vision worth investigating further. By no means is it the only solution or a perfect solution or anything like that, but we've been really excited and found really good early responses as we've been working to make this possible. So that's why I'm optimistic long-term about how technology can help self-governance and democracy. Please tear it apart.
No, no challenges to that one. No, I think that's good. So the question, is tech good for democracy? Am I doing something wrong? No, okay. It came back to get me. Oh
Listening.
Ooh, it's around us everywhere. Okay, so for me, when I get this question, is tech good for democracy? This comes up a lot. I like to remind people that a paper ballot is a technology, right? Like voting from the very beginning depended on technologies. Does anyone know why we vote on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November? What's that? For farmers, yeah, that's part of it. So it's after the harvest. So you've got, it's not the dead of winter because you're gonna need to ride a horse to get there also. So it's a good time for farmers. But why Tuesday?
In between market days when farmers are selling all their crops is the story that I've been told.
But why not Monday?
Because you're selling your crops on Sunday or Saturday, so you want to have enough time to get home so that you can vote.
Well, you're also in church on Sunday. So you need a whole day to get on your horse and get to the voting place on Tuesday. Right, so the horse was an important part of the original design of voting technology in the United States. Is technology good for democracy? Yes, it's always been a part of democracy and it always will be, and I think it could get a lot better. And I just like to remind people when people start to freak out about technology and it ruining democracy, maybe this is a moment where we're trying something and it's not the right thing to try, or we're making mistakes. But one of the other things that I like about there's this idea that the slowness of democracy is a really big problem. But I find that the deliberate slowness built into our democratic systems in the United States could fall into the it's a feature, not a bug category of technologies. And in particular, the slowness that it takes for our federal government or our state government to adopt new technologies. It might actually be kind of a good thing. The technology that I'm most excited about actually for democracy right now, or one of them, is happening right here. Does anyone know what the city of San Francisco is doing about paper ballot voting right now? No one in this room knows. The city of San Francisco is like a pioneer. Did you know?
Having a state-owned, not corporate-owned ballot system. I think there's an AB about that.
Yeah. So the city of San Francisco is the leader of this process, and it's now a collaboration with other cities in California, and I think in other states too, but to make an open source technology system for paper ballots. And you might be thinking open source, that's digital, paper, that's paper. But no, you need technology to count the ballots and to print the ballots and to design it. So they're building this open source technology. And it seems like anachronistic. Why would our city be investing more money in paper ballots? But I actually think that's a really important thing to do with ballot security. Yes, lottery tickets are paper. Yes, they are. I wouldn't encourage you to buy those, though.
The guy that invented the lottery ticket, he owns a patent on it and he gets paid royalties on it. He's the leading effort as well for what's called the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. He made so much money off the lottery tickets, now he's trying to turn our electoral college system into the popular vote. Total random aside, but I always find that fascinating. He's a Stanford computer science professor.
You know, I keep forgetting this. I'm curious for you guys, but also from everyone out here. You know, other thoughts on technology as a positive force for good in democracy, but also, remember at the beginning I asked a couple of questions, and the first one was, is it important to you to live in a democracy? This is one of those moments where I'm kind of curious to hear from some of the people who might not have thought so. But the second question, you know, was, are you optimistic about the future of democracy? And for those of you who came in late, it was a very lukewarm. Most people, yeah, I want to live in a democracy. A lot of people lukewarm. And I'm curious for those lukewarmers, when you start hearing about some of these possible innovations, and we can talk about more, is there a warm and fuzzy sense? So a lot of possible directions to go. A few people. Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, so I was one of the people that said that it wasn't important for me to live in democracy, and that opinion is informed by climate change. It's my opinion right now that due to the crazy things that are going to happen to the planet and the impacts that's going to have on our society in terms of breakdown of social structures, the large refugee crises, the lack of food, it's going to be hard to respond to these challenges in a democratic and effective manner. You know, say we have 20 years to deal with this type of stuff. Like, you need to transition from more of a market economy to more of a command economy to like inspire widespread change on such a quick scale. So for me, I think there's more benefit in having more of an enlightened despotism that can kind of help make these changes instead of kind of allowing the entire population to decide on these things in an ad hoc way.
Who would you nominate as the despot?
That is a great question. Hopefully they come forward. But I mean, for me, you know, there's this idea of enlightened monarchy, and we have enough smart people in the world that, you know, hopefully we can find them and then they can be motivated to do it. But I think that sort of collection of power is interesting and important at this point in time. Just how we get there is the hard part. Totally, but like, if we're all gonna die, what's a little corruption?
The Davids would like to register a disagreement.
So let me just see hands of who wants to say something so I can get a little like sense. You and you back there and you. Okay, so you guys four, and then we're gonna see where we are.
Okay. I actually wanted to push back on this whole technology improving democracy. I actually think it's made it worse. We've seen the rise of like cable news and the internet driving candidates to more extreme positions. And it seems like a lot of the proposals you guys are talking about are moving more towards a direct democracy, but we've seen that kick back, like with Brexit. One of the reasons was that they went to a ballot for the whole country rather than having representatives who can maybe think a little bit more long term. So I'm kind of curious what you think about that. Oh, sorry about that.
Yeah, I can talk a bit more about liquid democracy. So just to be clear, it's a mix between direct and representative. So the default, if you happen to be apathetic or you weren't knowledgeable to make your own decision, the default would be that your vote would go to your representative to make the decision for you. But if you did care and you wanted to express your opinion, you could do that. Or a third option would be that you could delegate your vote to someone in your community, so all the decision making wouldn't flow, or the power isn't frozen in just a few powerful people. Yeah.
So actually, I want to agree with the gentleman that the technology is, in my opinion, is actually in the beginning is actually bad for democracy. Fundamentally because the general population is not used to it. It doesn't know how to use it. I mean, Facebook, as an example, it started in 2006, 7, whatever, and it took right now we're 2019 and we're talking about regulating what information is fake, what is not, and it's still an open question, and people get deceived by a lot of wrong information. This has been 13 years or 14 years or however number of years, right? It takes a long time for people to adapt, and sometimes they don't. It's been the same with every single technology, most of the technologies. So in the beginning, I think technology is bad. It takes time for people to adapt, and then maybe at some point it will be helpful.
Who are the other two folks? Oh yeah, over here.
Zaruk.
I mean, I can try to speak loudly. Okay, great.
Hi, so I would like to push back a little bit on I do believe in the technology can be a benefit to democracy, but the way that almost everyone talked about was how it will allow each individual to have much more of a voice in the decision making, which I think that's the part which I do question a little bit more of. In my perspective, there are experts in certain things. There are people who do PhDs or have worked on it all their whole lives, and they should be a bit more empowered to actually make a decision than a random person who doesn't have any knowledge of that subject to make a call. Whether it's climate change, it's until we wait for everyone to make a call and make a decision. Wouldn't it be beautiful if scientific this is proven, it's going to destroy us all? Why don't we make a move on it and not worry about if we're going to get reelected for this reason stuff? So, and coming from Turkey myself, and the example you gave, it's mandatory in Turkey to vote, and there was I think 78 or 85% voter show up, and we've been electing a dictator basically, or basically elected someone who would ultimately become a dictator, and through democracy. So it's just something to think about, whether it's the pillars are in place for democracy to work well, or if they're not, how can we re-put them in place, like education and multiple other things, because democracy alone is not a useful goal because it doesn't work for the best.
And then I think you were the last.
I'm very excited about democracy's potential. I love democracy. I'm constantly amazed at the foresight of checks and balances and how that continues to come up and help us evolve. But I am a bit apprehensive because it depends on how we will adapt our democracy to how we're adapting in our current times. I think one of the current challenges is that democracy depends on dialogue. We're a very large country. We're a very diverse country. There's no way we're going to agree. So democracy is about the dialogue that happens between the various opinions. And I think right now technology is really fracturing our voice, as we know. We have a fractured media landscape. A simple way of putting it, back in the day, you go to work, you go to school, you know that your coworker's seen something on CBS or Fox or NBC or whatever. And now we have such a fractured voice that it's difficult to have that dialogue, and the dialogues become us versus them and the other. So I wonder how technology can obviously help us hear more voices and amplify more voices and amplify those that don't have power. But it also, people have access to power and know how to play it. Not everyone knows how to use those strings. And so, yeah.
That's great. You know, I have a question for Agatha. I know you're early in your candidacy, and so not going to hold you, well, maybe they will. I'm not going to hold you to anything. But I know you've been doing a lot of thinking about what is your vision. I mean, if you win, you suddenly have a major power role in shaping what the future for all of us of democracy is. And, you know, not constrained by technology, I would just love to hear like your vision and, you know, what's inspiring you and sort of how you feel like we can catapult ourselves forward.
Yeah, well, I think, there are two ways I could be running. I could be running as a traditional candidate, which I have my views on this, working on social justice movements, or running as a liquid democracy candidate. I think we're in a great time where more diverse, younger, first-time candidates, working class people are running, winning, and being effective. And we are, I think, headed in a direction where the power of the people will prevail over corporate interests or these frozen power structures. Were you asking what other things that I care about beyond technology, or what, or how we're going to build this?
As you listen to some of the concerns and some of the issues that are being raised, you know, what are some of the tenets for you? You know, what are the priorities?
So one thing I care about is that anytime you were to try something new or build a new technology, is to make sure that access to it is equitable and that you actually are bringing newer voices into the fold and not continuing to exclude people. I would, one thing that I see, especially in San Francisco, is just in the decline, or as we become a more secular society, we are losing these spaces where we come together, let's say once a week, and talk about our values. And so I do think education is a huge priority and communicating that. But I think there is so much promise. Like, coming from the blockchain space, we are headed in this movement towards, centralized powers are declining. I think, one of our First Amendment rights is the right to organize. We have the right to gather. And beyond, like, connected to democracy, but slightly separate, is how do you form organizations? How do you gather around a common cause? And right now, every time you have to file a corporation or start an organization, there's always a middleman, a government or a corporation that's an arbiter. And I'm really excited for a time where, in a non-surveillance state, we can gather together and organize for what we want out of our democracy.
Thank you. And, David's, I'm curious, as you've listened, you shouldn't speak at the same time now. I'm curious, as you've listened to some of the concerns, and I know you both have heard other concerns. I'm just curious some of your reactions. I noticed you, David Evan Harris, taking some notes. And
Yeah. Okay. So I'm not going to address everyone, but to the despot one. What do you do if the despot changes their mind, or the despot tries to pass it on to their kid? You'd have no mechanism in place to get rid of the despot. It just doesn't seem like a good idea to me. But this is a democracy. You have freedom. Think what you want. So then let's see, direct democracy. I thought about this for a long time, and there's this spectrum, I think, between direct and representative democracy. If direct is here, representative is here, I'm over here. I just want more representative democracy, not more of it, but I want it to be more representative. And I think that's where our current system is really lacking. Like, there's just one of the things I think is useful to think about is the episodes, the length of the episodes of democracy that happen today. And if you think about, like, the shift in the episodic nature of TV, broadcast TV, to social media that's on all the time, or cable news that's on all the time, right? Like, the episodes of our democracy happen in 2, 4, and 6 year segments. And it's only in between those that we get these opportunities to change things in a meaningful, direct way. I'd just like shorter episodes, or I'd like more access, or I'd like to shift the time scale a little bit. But I do think there's a lot of value in having people whose full-time job is to think about political issues, to go back and then educate. I do think it's to your point earlier about education, it's a clear responsibility of the political establishment, of the state, to educate people. And the breakdown of public education in the United States and California, it's a real problem. It just doesn't work. Yeah, did you want to say something?
But I appreciate your concern. No, I was actually more curious about what happens when the population is of a mindset that is not right. What happens when people gather together and become the majority to do negative things to others? Like, how is the system in which you're talking about, how do we protect people in that case? Because if you always take what's popular is not always right.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I can talk a little bit about. Okay, so we've talked about liquid democracy. Another kind of digital democracy that I'm excited about, in that has actual real life examples, is called quadratic voting. So actually, the Colorado state legislature just implemented this. And it's a way of getting rid of tyranny of the majority by being able to not just show your preference, but show the intensity of your preference. So for example, if you have 2 things you would like to vote on and you have 10 vote tokens, you could split that evenly and put 5 votes on each one. That would be like a typical way of voting. But let's say you actually really prefer A, and you want to put 3 votes towards that. It's quadratic, it's exponential, so 3 to the power of 2. You can put 9 vote tokens on option A and just 1 on option B. And that's a way of showing preference, because yes, if the majority each just gets one vote equally, then the majority will always win, and that you could argue that civil rights wouldn't have happened. So if you are able to express that intensity, that's one way of getting around that.
Yeah, I want to chime in about all these conversations. So the point about we need this benevolent dictator, and can we trust the people? What about Brexit? And the people are doing nothing about climate change, and all these related questions. The optimistic news is that most people around the world do want to do something about climate change. I mean, most people are in favor of it. It's elected politicians in America that are not in favor of it, or the current party in the majority. But every nation in the world except for the US and Syria, and at one point Nicaragua signed the Paris Accord, and then Nicaragua did sign it. So now it's just the US and Syria. And so the point is that I would make the case that there's a pretty clear line to be drawn between the financial incentives of the current carbon industry, which are quite large. Until recently, these are all the largest companies by market cap, and just regulatory capture in the American government system. So I think the idea that people don't want to do something about climate change, my read on most of the data suggests the opposite. It's that our current forms of government aren't doing enough about it. And to this other point as well about we need experts, I mean, agree 100% that it would be absurd to pretend like any last person we're going to ask off the street, hey, go vote on this 1,000-page bill. Ask some random person, what do you think about X, Y, or Z? I mean, obviously that's not going to get anywhere for so many reasons. And so part of the vision of a personalized representative system is that you get to pick the experts in particular topics that are the most knowledgeable. So right now we have just 500 politicians for the entire nation that their qualification was they were better, they beat one other person, or they won their primary, but they beat one other person, but they're the one-size-fits-all representative for everything. In the future, I believe and I hope and I want to help make possible that each and every one of you will get to empower your personal all-star team of representatives. So you can say, this is who I think is the most knowledgeable person when it comes to environmental policy, and this person when it comes to foreign policy, and this person when it comes to X, Y, or Z issues. And each of them are also empowering the people that they know because they're even more immersed in the field. And so we want experts and we want to empower representatives, and we want more representation. And the point is just that our current system, and from my perspective and what I think a lot of these symptoms, including Brexit itself, are saying is that our current representatives are not really doing that great of a job of representing us. So that's sort of the vision that I hope will become obvious as this becomes more possible in the future.
I'm really glad that you put out there the term regulatory capture, because I think that it's a really important point about why our current system is not working. The Paris Accord, also the Paris Accord is totally non-binding. I mean, I think we all celebrated and were so excited when the Paris Accord finally happened, but there's no enforcement mechanism for that thing. That is so depressing that it took 20 or 30 or more years, depending on how you count, if you count starting in '92 with the Rio Earth Summit, right? To get to that, and that's all we got was something that was non-binding. I mean, that's pretty bad. But I think that when we say these broad statements like democracy is not going to work, we just need a despot, or technology is really bad for democracy, it's just had really bad impacts, I think that's a tempting and alluring even position to have, because you have that thought and then you're like, yeah, that's it. It's simple. It's easy. But I don't think, like I said, the paper ballot is a technology. We're not going to get rid of all technology in our democracy. I think the more important question is which technology is bad for democracy, or which technologies are bad for democracy, over what time period did they have this bad effect, and what do we need to do to fix that, to get rid of those technologies, or to change who the owners of those technologies are, and turn it on a better course. And unfortunately, those are big projects and take decades. And I think the same question is to the right one to ask about democracy. It's not is democracy going to work or not? No, let's get rid of it. It's what's exactly is broken with our democracy, and how can we fix those specifics?
You back there, and you guys. Oh boy, there are a bunch. Well, why don't you start, and then we'll kind of move around. And if I forget who raised your hand, I apologize. Just remind me.
Hello. So I think during this conversation, I heard a couple of times that we're talking about representatives as experts, where in reality, they're just our representatives. And I think technology enabling more people to choose the people who represent us is different than choosing experts, because by no means is our current president an expert in nuclear security or an expert on climate change or an expert on any of these issues, but he still represents us. So I think that would, that would steer the conversation we had a little bit differently if we think about it in that regard.
You know, I want to agree with you. I really want to agree with you. I think I've been trying to just be a moderator and not like have an opinion, but I have to have an opinion on this. Like, I see that we're in an environment today where success in politics is A, raising money, having lots of meetings, and B, work in the media. I don't see how that makes you qualified to run these enormous institutions and manage these enormous systems. That's all I have to say about that. Who's next?
What's the alternative? Yeah, but that's democracy. It means like, sounds like maybe you don't want our version of democracy.
Correct.
I mean, I agree with all these critiques, but it's the Winston Churchill quote about it's the worst system except for all the others. I mean, what is the alternative? If there's solid ideas for the alternative, by all means, let's be talking about them.
You know, I'll reiterate it. I think it's been said a couple of times, but I think a key alternative is that we build systems. We build a system. It's not that we just find a candidate who's amazing and breaks through. We build a system that enables all voices, but particularly voices who know something about an issue or whose communities trust them to know something about an issue. And that system allows those voices to come forward. That you don't have to have the big pockets. You don't have to go to all the conventions and the meetings and know all the people. And, you know, I think, so I think that is one of the things I myself am working on, delegative democracy, liquid democracy. And I think that if we enact a system where we enable various nodes throughout the system to chime in and have that expertise and then get their community support, it's another way in. It's a side door in. Yeah. So there, and then you, and now I'm doing a bad job moderating.
So I have a question sort of along those lines. I mean, I agree, democracy is not perfect, but you sort of have to figure out what is the best way forward. And democracy, kind of like technology, is a vehicle that can be either used for good or for bad. And it's sort of dependent on the input from people. And so I'm curious to hear from the panel about how do we better engage people, and how do we make sure that people are informed when there are laws that are hundreds of pages. I'm curious to hear about the logistics about what you think we can do to improve the people inputs that would empower technology to actually have a positive influence on democracy.
Can I take that one or start?
Great. And then I know. Yeah, and then I know there's some other.
I just have a point on your point about money and politics. And I think what has happened along the way is a loss of values. And because money... So I think what's lost along the way, at least in my opinion, is the value system that democracy initially was built upon is to do social good for the mass people. And I feel like money has corrupted those value systems. And I don't think we talk about values as much anymore.
Yeah. Did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Exactly. I think you're completely right. I also wanted to attempt to address the question back there. So there's a technology that's much more analog that hasn't come up yet, which is, it's referred to in a few different ways, but one is deliberative polling. And so we get jury duty, right? Like, actually, I think I have it next week. You know, imagine if instead of jury duty to decide a particular case, you got jury duty to be called to Sacramento to go decide and inform a piece of legislation. So like a random selection of people to participate in the legislative process. So James Fishkin is a professor at Stanford who's done a lot of work around this, but other people, Mongolia did a really big effort in deliberative democracy, deliberative polling recently. So this is a system that's been tried in a lot of different ways in a lot of different parts of the world. It is analog and it's kind of expensive because you have to get, sometimes they'll do it with 100 people in a room. California did a big experiment where they had a couple hundred people in a room for, I think it was a couple of days, like full days. And in these groups you could get, when you select these people, it can be random, or you can also try to deliberately select for demographic representation of the state or the country that you're in, and make sure you really have a representative group that's not self-selecting in terms of who accepts the invitations. So you can do a lot to try to correct for that. And these bodies, these deliberative polling or deliberative democracy bodies, when they get together, you could actually get them together for a whole week and give them 20 different topics that they need to sit in small tables, talk about, have moderators who guide their discussions, and then come up with better decisions, and maybe as a group of 200 people come to some agreement to make a recommendation to legislators, or maybe not, maybe make the recommendation they couldn't decide on something. But like, that's another tool that I think is a really big improvement that's not so digital. And there are digital attempts to replicate that, but I actually like that in-person effort.
There were some folks over here.
Well, I have a comment and a question. Thank you, girlfriend. So, first of all, qualifier, context. My first time at Manny's, shame on me. I came from BBC background, KQED 25 years ago, was one of the really early employees at Wired. This place is absolutely like hashtag democracy's immune system, and I'm trying to be cool, I know that, by even using a hashtag because I'm 50. So I'm here in my capacity, again, full disclosure, because transparency is everything. And I did run global communications at HP for 7 years for Carly Fiorina. Her politics were different than mine. She did run for president for that spot. However, I also know what it's like from just being 50 and experience, what it's like to be a woman in a man's world. And I think everything you guys are saying is beyond extraordinary, like really, like feminists are men too. But what we just had happened, and I think it's partly, honestly, our conditioning as women, if we have a young woman, I don't know if everyone's truly, because I know this is going to be like absolutely major national news within like minutes, definitely within 24 hours. So here right now, because this wonderful, fantastic, intelligent Stanford, Emerson collective engineer, I'm going to say it for you. I am her first major donor, and I'm proud to do it. Major, what does that mean? Not that much in today's scheme, right? Certainly not that much when we're hoping for a grassroots experience here. She just announced, this is, where are we, in the mission here? I mean, I'm sorry, I've been in news, but she just announced modestly that she is, talk about chutzpah, balls, whatever you call it. I'm English, I can say things like that. Like, talk about that she's running for Nancy Pelosi's seat. I mean, have we, like 45 minutes ago, and she did it like, I just want to say I'm here tonight. And that's because what we're going to do is we're all having a moment of leaning in. And I don't think this is, as a woman, and I'm a volunteer, proud to be, this is democracy's immune system at work here. We have not to be ageist, but I can do it because I'm 50. She's gorgeous, right? She's 27 years old, and I can say that because I'm a woman, right? You have to just live with it.
90-second rule. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. See, I've already broken it because I'm 50. You know what I'm saying.
Agatha, do you have a response?
No. Everyone needs to vote for Agatha.
On the panel.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
I know it. Share it with us, right? Do we feel that? No?
Definitely.
I beg for forgiveness, don't ask for permission. Right now.
I'm supposed to say.
Agatha's really amazing. I don't know if you guys know this yet, but Agatha's awesome.
I'm giving my microphone to Agatha for the rest of the time.
We're all. Thank you. I'm being put on the spot. Okay, well, to say something about that, yeah, it does take a lot to run for office, and I just want to make a comment on when people say that millennials don't care or that they're lazy, or when you have a question about how do we get more people involved and to participate in our democracy. Well, I think if you just look at how the system is set up, like if you really care about something. So, for example, something that I'm personally passionate about is a pathway to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. This is something that I've been advocating for since I was in high school. It's been over a decade. And even when it makes logical sense, every poll shows that 85% of Americans want something, a majority of Congress will pass it, we're just stuck. There's small interest groups that prevent things from moving forward, and our only options as citizens are to either wait an entire election cycle to vote someone out, or to call a voicemail box that is not congruent with how we communicate today, or you have to march on the streets, and it's beautiful to see that, but right now our only options in the system are apathy or noise, and that noise doesn't have true institutional value. So this is why I think that we need to have a better system and why I'm running for office.
Go ahead. Hi, thank you. Just had a comment on some of the earlier Well, first off, Agatha, I'm really excited. We were college classmates, and this is really cool to see you go. On a couple of the topics, I think on democracy, like I think I lived in Europe for a few years as well, and I saw a few different systems at play that I think might be relevant, right? The first one, I think what you're referring to was probably a citizens' assembly. This is something that's really cool. I read a lot and spoke to people in Ireland who was like kind of participating in the one when they tried to change the abortion laws, which was a very controversial issue, but a lot of people very emotional about it, but they basically kind of had it all, lay out the facts, let the citizens debate it, and then the government was ready to enact whatever the citizens came up with. And I think that's one way to go for things that are hard, but really require people to think about it. And then the second one, I think the discussion about the sort of spectrum between direct and representative democracy, I think the system that works the most is like the Swiss system, right? Where there's referendum for a lot of things, people are always engaged, they're always educated. But when you only have one referendum and it's not very well practiced, that's when the problems happen, right? But how is that scalable? I think that's my question for the panel is like, that's ideal, but that's because you're a small country with a canton that everyone knows everyone and you vote on things that everyone knows about. How do you scale that without not only having a small group of activists care about thing and go into your open source technology and try to figure it out, right?
I'd like to say a little bit more about the technologies that Agatha has talked about that she's interested in using. So you mentioned Democracy Earth. So I've been a fan of Democracy Earth and the predecessor Democracy OS for many years. So this technology came out of this new political party that started in Argentina that was called the Net Party, Partido de la Red. And they decided that they were going to create a new party and create a new technology to run that party at the same time that would give people constant daily input to the elected officials. The party didn't do so hot, but the technology did really well and got used in a lot of different places all over the world. So I think like conceptually what Agatha is talking about doing is what I sometimes talk about in my classes is an act of technological sovereignty, in the sense of she's talking about using an open source technology that she has control over in a sovereign way as the central piece of her candidacy. Correct me if I'm wrong. And that idea that she will maintain this direct continuous, constant line of communication with her constituents, I think is really beautiful. She's not saying that she's going to do exactly what they say, exactly when they say it, every minute. She's still saying she's going to actually do the work of understanding the issues as a politician. But she's saying that she's not going to go get elected and then spend 2 years raising money, which Nancy Pelosi is amazing at raising money, right? I mean, that's a big skill. But Agatha is saying that she's going to spend her time and her energy as a candidate and as an elected official, which would be great if you could be that, and I'm really hopeful for you. But like spending that time instead having this beautiful, intense, continuous, direct relationship with your constituents, rather than doing this episodic cycle of go raise a bunch of money, convince a bunch of people to vote for you, then do a bunch of stuff, find a few good things you can talk about, or a handful of good things you can talk about, and then just kind of keep raising money the whole time, and then go back to the people and convince them that you did the right things, but keep raising money and be distracted by money. Like, I think there's a really direct connection between the technology you're proposing to use, the role of money in politics, and making democracy better.
Yep. That's a great pitch. And I'll say, in researching this and trying to build this, I've talked to a lot of politicians at every level, local, state, and federal. And what I hear is that, there are some tools that get close to that. There is social media, Facebook election tools, Twitter could be seen as a public good place it's like a public square. But there's no way to verify who you're talking to. It's just like politicians don't even want to get close because you can't tell if someone is a Russian troll or actually a constituent or not. And so having ways, building technology specifically for this is really important.
David, could you we've spoken a lot about verification and identity, and maybe I can just ask an open-ended question. Could you just also speak to some of the things you've been working on in terms of verification and identity and along those lines?
Yeah. So right now, if you want to weigh in on an issue, you're told call your representative or email your representative. Usually more call. Why they say to call? The reason is because it will tie up their phone line, so it will be more annoying to them. So they'll want to vote your way to get you to go away. To Agatha's earlier point about make as much noise as possible, but these tools are not really all that trustworthy. What the most famous online organizing has to do around net neutrality. There's like SOPA and PIPA and all these bills, and all these websites had banners about it, and then they went black for the day to protest. And so hundreds of thousands of people weighed in. Well, then as soon as Trump got into office, he had a new FCC, Ajit Pai was his new chairperson, and they were going to remove all the restrictions that the Obama admin had put in. And so they had this page that was open for comments, open for public comments. And it just now has come out that a third-party lobbyist organization created millions of fake comments, stole names, committed fraud on a massive scale, wrote in fake names and fake computer-generated comments to impersonate people. And exactly like Agatha is saying, like, representatives don't know whether these are really their constituents or not. So the foundation of a trustworthy democracy, I mean, any democracy depends upon one person, one vote, not whoever can hire the most programmers to write scripts, unlimited votes. And so we've been dealing with this problem for a while and trying to figure out at the digital tools that we've been building. And so basically what we're doing now that works really well is it's always an opt-in increasing process. So you can leave a public comment, but we just mark it as unverified. And then you can also add your name and address, and we can look up, is there a real registered voter with that name and address? And then we have an additional step that people can opt into where you give a phone number, and we can check the caller ID record on your phone number. Surprise, in case you didn't know it, all that information is public. I didn't make it that way. Everybody should know about their privacy implications. But it means that we can verify people very quickly and very easily. And so when you weigh in on our platform, and we're trying to set this up for other platforms as well, you can actually see that people are verified. So it's a really big problem. It's not in any way a solved problem. You want a solution that's accessible, that reaches people that don't necessarily always have smartphones, and is very quick, and is very cheap. There are a lot of other ideas out there that mix all these different possibilities, but it's something that people should be asking about and working towards and building towards. And there are certain government solutions that could work better. In other countries, they have like ID cards. Like Estonia is the most famous example, where every last citizen has a digital ID card that they can plug in and pay their taxes. And most countries, you can pay your taxes this way. The U.S. is really behind on this in a lot of ways. So there are solutions, and they're not all widely available yet, but they ought to be, and everybody ought to demand them.
That's great. You know, we're getting close to the end here. I think we have time for one, maybe two more comments. So if you haven't spoken yet and have something burning, now is your moment. And this is like, yeah, and you are going to self-select yourselves of who's going to do this.
Hi. I'm wondering who here is currently working on a liquid democracy project. If you could raise your hands, that would be really interesting. Okay. How many people would like to be working on a liquid democracy project? More people. Okay. How do we fix that? Is that the real problem, that we're not doing the things that we want to do together?
Send me an email. We can make this happen. There's so many things we got to do.
What's your email address?
I'm david@liquid.us.
I'm Agatha at agathaforcongress.com. But I love that question. One of the beautiful things about living in San Francisco is that we are the leaders of the future, and we have our finger on the pulse of what that future will be, what technology is being built. And I see that many of the smartest minds are already working on the crypto space, on blockchain space. But yeah, democracy tools, civic tech, liquid democracy, get in touch. Let's build this together.
So when Agatha gets elected, I'm really hoping that there are a few positions in congressional offices. There's the legislative correspondent, and that position as an LC, your job historically has been to write paper letters back to constituents or to like count postcards. I actually had to do this. I counted boxes of postcards from the Sierra Club. So like I hope that Agatha makes 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 of her legislative correspondents actually programmers and community moderators who build the technology tools and contribute to the open source projects that she needs to do this work. And she'll really need those people in the campaign. So like now is a really good time if you raised your hand. Like get in early.
Great idea.
Yeah, there's a table in the back to sign up for Agatha for Congress.
You know,
everybody go check that out.
And this is a great moment. I think, thank you for bringing us into the action stage of a conversation. So here was the kind of the arc, right? We started with some problems, some possible solutions, and now we're getting into like action phase. And I'd like to, I think I'd like to start actually wherever we want to go, but I want to make sure everyone on the stage gets to put out there a call to action. Doesn't mean you got to do it, but at least we have options out there of things we can do to funnel some of our energy. So why don't I start out here? Are there any call to actions that anyone wants to?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really excited about liquid democracy and seeing that be realized through your campaign. Touching on a few things that came up, like the fracturing of social media, the loss of public spaces, and then people voting, tyranny of the majority. What I'm working on is called the Community Democracy Project, which is bringing participatory democracy to Oakland by establishing neighborhood assemblies that meet throughout the year.
Let's talk.
People meet throughout the year, learn about issues, give feedback to their representatives, and then at the end of the year vote on how much goes to each city department. Sorry, I'm not good at public speaking. In the budget. So it ties in a lot with a lot of these things. And one of the ideas is the power of face-to-face. When neighbors meet up with each other, they see they're real people with real problems, and they're probably not. They build empathy. I don't know how that fits in with technology so much, but face-to-face. We need signature gatherers, if anyone likes to do that. Talk to me.
That's great.
Community Democracy Project. I didn't bring any cards today.
Okay, I'm going to play the old card again, because I think I'm definitely the oldest person in here. No? Okay, good. Okay. Yeah, the other volunteers at the back. So don't be ageist, guys. It's, 25 years of being here. Manny's is, shame on me, it's my first time. I'm on the board of the Center for Investigative Reporting. I should know better. Extraordinary to see this happening here. This is democracy.
Also, we're running low on time, so let's. What was the call to action?
I'm amplifying. I'm going to do it old school. It has been cut off, but I have a call to action. Hi, everyone. I'm Kat. I'm the GM here. Thanks for coming to this event. Come to more. We have 5 presidential candidates coming this week. Learn who are your options. Learn what you can ask from them and what you should demand from them. So keep coming out. Keep getting involved.
Democracy's immune system.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Register to vote.
Could not be happier to see so many people here. This is like the most encouraging thing I've seen in 24 hours. It's amazing.
Do we have 2 more minutes?
This is awesome. Seriously.
Oh, we have a few more minutes. All right, so hold on. I have 2 calls to action. One of them is the platform David down there and I are working on is called liquid.us. Just go sign up, check it out, see what we're doing. There's a lot of experimenting and growing. I am Josh at liquid.us, and I'm super curious for all collaboration, critiques, anything. Just throw it at me.
Especially critiques.
Since there was a comment made about the age in the room, I'd just like to point out that to win a general election in San Francisco, you need 170,000 votes. And there are more than 200,000 millennial voters in San Francisco, so we could decide the entire election. But we tend to not turn out. So please register to vote, and get your friends to do the same.
Call to action. Run for public office, especially if you're a woman or a person of color. Run for office, and if you don't want to do it this time, volunteer for someone else's campaign and take control of this system that we built that still kind of does work and has some avenues. It looks hard, it looks challenging, but someone in this room, in addition to Agatha, should probably do it. So please run for office.
Another invitation. Over the last 2 and 3 months or so, Sai, who's right here in the middle of the room, and I have been, and other people have been working on this new podcast all about what healthier democracy can look like. And we've been lucky enough to have on a bunch of fascinating guests talking about their work, addressing this problem, that problem, or the other problem. So if you're interested in this sort of content, there's audio-only version. It's called Liquid Future. It's everywhere you can find podcasts. App Store, Stitcher, Spotify, all the things. Or on YouTube as well with video, liquidfuture.org. So check it out. We just started it. We love lots of feedback. Thanks.
Thank you.
It's so important to consider this question. What do I desire? Desire, 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 desire.